Hi everyone, welcome to episode 31 of The Green Room. I am here with my colleague Nick. How are you, Nick?
I'm very well, James.
Excellent.
You okay?
I'm very good, thank you. I'm very good. We've had a little bit of a recess over the Christmas period, and now we are going to start doing the podcast again. So today what we thought we'd do is tie up a few loose ends. So we get sent loads of questions over every week basically. And so we thought we'd take some of these questions and see if we can give a few answers. Obviously we don't know everything.
Yeah, but also, James, it's important to say, because we've just come from Christmas, happy belated New Year to you as well.
Thank you very much. I mean, it's very belated, but thank you.
I would say these questions and queries built up in the inbox over Christmas, because, after you've done with your turkey and your presents, what else have you got to think about?
Email the Green Age.
Exactly.
Email the Green Age. Absolutely. So we're just going to take them one by one, basically, and then see how we get on.
However, before we do start,
yes,
one of the most important things of these podcasts is how can people find out, listen to us, watch us, those sorts of things? Well,
to watch us, you can go to our YouTube channel and just type The Green Room. If you'd like to listen to us, you can go onto Podbean, and you can actually find us there. Again, type The Green Room or The Green Age and you'll find us. Otherwise, you can go to Spotify. You can go to iTunes, iTunes Podcast, I think it's called. You can go to Stitcher, and you can go to TuneIn Radio, to name but a few.
But James, because I'm always forgetful about these acronyms, how do I always reset and find out about our podcast?
You go to our website, don't you?
Exactly.
You love our website.
I love our website.
So you go to our website, and at the top there's a little button that says podcast, click on it, and hey presto, all options appear for you.
Yes.
So, without further ado, episode 31. Here we go.
So Q&A. First top of the inbox was a boiler eco query. So Eco Energy Company Obligation is a government subsidy scheme which is running for about 2 to 3 years, I think.
Yeah, so shall I just the background of this question? Mm. So, and we've taken all the names off this, but a lady sent email in basically saying her elderly relative had been, so someone had come around and offered her a new boiler, but there had to be she had to make some financial contribution, and she asked us if this was a scam.
Was that lady's relative, was she on one of the entitlements?
She was on one of the entitlements, yes. But basically the answer is, dun dun dun.
It depends.
Okay, fine, and what does it depend on?
So it depends on so when a reputable company that's registered to install these applications and boiler schemes under this government initiative, they will go and survey the property. Mm-hmm. They will look at, if I was to, with this location of boiler, the type it's got, the radiators, the heating system, if I replace it, this will be my full installation cost. Yeah. Now, the eco scheme gives an arbitrary value of what each property is worth. So, for instance, the way they've set the scheme up, they've said, right, okay, you've got different types of houses out there, like terraced, semi-detached, detached, and flats. And based on those criteria, they've assigned a monetary value of what they think a heating system a heating device, which is the boiler, will cost to replace. Now, if that company that's installing it finds that there's additional works there, for example, with low pressure, and they might need to install a pump or something like that, or they need to do some work with pipe work, it may cost more than what the government assigned as the cost of what they're willing to fund for that measure.
So basically there is a discrepancy between how much the works would cost and how much funding they get.
Yes, and it might well be that actually what the arbitrary value is more than what it costs for that.
But presumably the installer doesn't give you that money back.
Well.
So basically, if it works in their favour, they take the money. Mm-hmm. If it works the other way, i.e., it costs £2,000 to install a new boiler, however, they're only going to get £1,500 for the type of property this person has, the customer would have to pay £500. So with this, there is potentially some contribution that people do need to make. on the whole, they will try and get it to as low as possible. So they'll give you a choice of boilers and that sort of thing. So they can give you a cheaper option of boiler and all this sort of thing to try and bring it down to make it affordable. But yes, there may be some contribution. It doesn't necessarily mean a scam.
Okay.
So that's one.
Yeah. Good.
Then we had this one this morning, and this was about. So this was someone who
That's
is
the phone call.
So this is a cavity wall one, yeah? So this is, they had cavity wall insulation, and they were worried about it because there were sort of cold spots in their house, and they wanted to put external wall insulation on. Have I jumped ahead?
That's the next one. No, this is just, I think this was the one that came in. Are you thinking about the one that called
Well, let's jump to that one, because I've started
Okay.
explaining it. Do you need to have, the question was, do you need to remove the existing cavity wall insulation before you put the external wall insulation on?
I would say if the cavity wall installation was installed correctly,
Yes.
and the property over time has not had any behavioural change, i.e., it's not had any damp spots or anything like that, it is good to have external wall insulation, because at the end of the day, if you add more insulation to it,
Like a thicker jumper.
exactly, it's going to be a good thing. If obviously you've been beset by issues with it, it's well worth having someone reputable like a structural surveyor go out, have take some photos, do a boroscopic inspection. This is where they drill into a tiny piece of mortar, or look at the condition of why potentially that wall is having those issues.
And let's remind people that the cavity walls initially, they got kind of introduced in the 1930s, and their sole purpose at that time was to stop damp travelling from the outer leaf to the inner leaf. And so water would obviously get through the outer leaf and then travel down due to gravity, because there was nothing in the space, and therefore you wouldn't have any water ingress into the house.
Quite popular in the westerly parts of the country, because they are in our high exposure area, so you get lots of Atlantic weather currents.
Driving rain.
Yeah, which you don't see, to be honest, in London. Well, you do sometimes, but not on. If you go out to, say, the west coast of Ireland, it's a nearly daily occurrence.
Yes. Yeah.
Here, it's probably twice a year phenomenon.
Yeah. So, but the cavity wall, cavity wall insulation got introduced in the late 70s, and they were basically building houses with cavity wall insulation already in situ. Some with new houses, when they build cavity walls, they tend to, if it's like a phenolic foam, they would attach the insulation to the inner leaf, so there is still a small actual cavity between the outer leaf, the insulation, and then the inner leaf, which allows for that water to drop down and away from the property. I think that really the issues with cavity wall insulation come with incorrectly installed cavity wall insulation. Yeah. So this is on if you're in these kind of areas you're talking about, these coastal areas, and you inject insulation into the walls, you're potentially creating pathways. You're filling the cavity completely, and you're potentially creating pathways for water to pass through the outer leaf, across the insulation, into the house. And that's really where you have an issue. So if you had the choice and you have cavity wall insulation and it's all good, would you remove it before the EWI or leave it there?
So if I've had issues with it?
No, if you haven't had any
issues. I had not, I wouldn't. I would obviously get the installer to check out the property again.
Yeah.
Make sure any vents are extended. So make sure the ventilation is right, and then potentially add a thicker jacket.
Now, what if
up to a point? Obviously, if you go too much insulation, then you're sealing the elements inside. So you've got there's a toss up there. So there's a lot of talk about passive houses, but in passive houses, they also have mechanical ventilation systems, which allows for the airflow. So actually, while the fabric is amazingly insulated, you've still got to cater for the airflow. So there is a certain point there where you put too much insulation onto an existing property, and you hamper the ability of it to, for the internal air movements. So you need to think about ventilation and internal air quality as well.
Now, we went on a course recently. We went on a course to learn about U values. It's pretty exciting. And when we were there, they were talking about, so if you remove the cavity wall insulation because it's faulty before you apply external wall insulation, if the cavity is open and you put 150 mil of external wall insulation on the cavity, on the outside of the cavity, so in theory you've gone over and above what you need to and you have a hugely well insulated property, it makes no difference. That insulation is not doing anything. The reason is obviously there's a cold air current just flowing up and down the cavity. So if you're going to remove the cavity wall insulation and install EWI, you need to have a closed cavity. So that's worth mentioning. So if you do get a company to come and remove the cavity wall insulation, and they basically do this normally, if it's wool, they do it with a giant vacuum machine. If it's kind of more of a rigid insulation, they have this machine that flicks back and forward and breaks the insulation down, but they suck it out. But they can close the cavity at the same time. So it's worth mentioning that to them to ensure they do that.
Yeah.
Because the last thing you want to do is spend 10, 15 grand putting external wall insulation on your house and for it not to do anything.
Yeah.
Okay, next.
So yeah, I think this was an emailed one you jumped ahead of, a question about suitability, which I think you've answered. The only thing, suitability of cavity wall insulation to a property. What I would say there is, so you're talking about the Westerly properties and the high exposure area. So obviously there, I would treat that with caution. But also, I think one or two properties were done with the wrong type of fabric. So for instance, the property had a cavity, but it was timber frame.
Yeah.
So if you add then material into that cavity, which is there to allow the building fabric to breathe,
yeah,
you're effectively closing off that breathability, and therefore that's caused issues further down the line. Also, if the cavity's got rubble, so it's worth cleaning out, and then looking at potentially installing cavity wall insulation materials as well. So try and obviously speak to the manufacturers of the systems that inject the cavity wall insulation and see, talk about their manufacturer's guarantees and approved installers.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, get that audit trail and documentation to cover yourself. Should something go awry. Yeah.
Right. Next question. So we had this is one. There are some creams that you can put on the outside of properties. And they're kind of these miracle creams that allegedly increase energy efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
So do you want to do this one or shall I do this one?
I'll just briefly mention the context. So this one we had, and you were there with me. We were at a trade show about a couple of months ago,
mm-hmm.
and the part of the country that we were at is basically a lot of properties are of stone, traditional stone construction. So there's really not much you can do to it. So you can't effectively
cover it in render.
Yeah, because
basically.
Visually, but also local authorities would not allow you to change
mm-hmm.
the appearance of the property. So we're debating basically with the public about the effectiveness of these water repellent creams, and you had some good suggestions there.
Well, so the water repellent cream. So basically, they're a hydrophobic cream. Right, so what you're doing is making your house waterproof, but they're still breathable. So they're a silicon-based product. You apply it, and then if water hits the walls, it won't be absorbed by the brick or blockwork. It will just be repelled because they're hydrophobic. Now, through a wet material, heat travels faster. Right, so if I have a wet property, it will get cooler quicker than a dry property. So, yes, actually, these will make a difference. It's not the same as adding a whole heap of insulation to the outside of your house. Yeah, because, when we're talking about external wall insulation or even cavity wall insulation, we're talking maybe 100 mil, or in the case of cavity wall insulation, we're talking 50 millimeters of insulation. This stuff is like nanomillimeters thick. It's very, very thin, but because it keeps the walls dry, if you do it at the end of summer, say, it'll keep the walls nice and dry. It will slow down that rate of heat loss through the winter months. I think one of the things worth mentioning is it doesn't last forever.
And that's where I'd say, so while I agree with the companies that are putting this out to the market, and I think these are fantastic products.
Mm-hmm.
They do stretch their kind of performance a little bit, i.e.
Yeah.
lifetime guarantees. I don't believe in that, but I certainly do believe in what you've just described.
Yeah.
I.e. they are quite effective in the first couple of years of application.
Yeah, agreed. And bricks are incredibly porous. They really absorb water. So if you can make them waterproof with one of these type products, then it's obviously a decent thing. So is that one?
I think so.
Would you do it?
I would. I think because I haven't got those stone properties, but I would put external insulation. I've got no.
But it's considerably cheaper to go with one of these waterproofing creams.
Yeah, I don't have. I've got a pretty good overhang, I'd say, on my property, so they don't really get that wet.
No, fine. But I mean, if
I would
looking
recommend
for a
if
cheap
that's
option,
if that's anything you can do, then yeah, it's good.
Next.
Okay, a question we get quite a lot actually about the glazing quality. So you might have kind of sat there over Christmas and it's all nice and warm and fuzzy, but then you've got that annoying draft because I don't know, you've got a double glazing system that's been there for 20 years. So I suppose one question is, do I replace it with high quality double glazing? And if I've had recent double glazing, do I go a little bit extra and go for that triple glazing? Or do I do nothing at all?
So double glazing, so the very nature of windows, and remind me, I'm going to mention Tomorrow's World in a second, but the very nature of windows, the fact you have to see through them and they have to be clear, means that we can't really stuff them with insulation, right? So they are the weakness in the thermal envelope. The idea between double glazing is you've got two panes of glass and you have something, typically an inert gas, between them, which slows the movement of heat across two panes. You can have argon, yeah. Now, going from single glazing to double glazing works fantastically, and anyone who's seen those adverts in the 90s saying you're going to save, hundreds of pounds a year, they make a big difference. They were oversold, definitely then, but it does make a significant difference going from single to double. Even with noise and all this sort of stuff, it makes a big difference. But in terms of your room being more comfortable, that's massive. The reason I mentioned Tomorrow's World was because they had a thing from the BBC archive the other day where they were just showing something on Twitter, and they had aerogel. So they predicted what was going to happen in the future, and they, to be honest, this was done in like 1989, and they were pretty spot on with most things. But the windows they felt could be made with aerogel. So aerogel is like it's like a super insulator. That basically very, very little heat transfer. So you may have seen that picture where you've got a burner, like a Bunsen burner, so a really hot flame on firing into the bottom of it and an ice cube on the top, and the ice cube doesn't melt, but it's 800 degree Bunsen burner going into it. So if that was a reality, that would just be unbelievable if all windows were made of aerogel. They haven't yet come up with a product, and so we're now 30 odd years later, they haven't come up with a product that is clear and is a fantastic insulator. So they basically went from double glazing, which is two panes with this gas between them, to three panes, so triple glazing. Now, triple glazing, again, is an improvement on double glazing. It's still not as good as putting 90 mil of insulation on your external walls. So if I had double glazing that was 20 years old, if I could see through it, the windows hadn't blown, it wasn't ruining my views out into my garden or whatever, I would leave it be. I wouldn't replace it. You're not going to get the energy savings to pay back the cost.
Are you also limited on triple if you wanted to go for sash windows?
With the weight, yeah, because you've got three panes of glass there. Now, lots of companies at the moment are offering, so if you've got, they basically offer double glazing replacements, but will upgrade you to triple glazing for free. Is their kind of new marketing pitch. If they can offer it and they work for you, if you've got, as you say, the main issue is sash windows because of the weight of them. But if you've got, a standard window, their triple glazing is definitely worth it. And the cost is obviously coming down all the time. But do remember that your windows are always still the weak point of the thermal envelope.
So basically, if you're having to replace them for various reasons, i.e. your 25-year-old aluminium frame double glaze is given up,
falling out.
Then if you can, and if there's not a big difference between double, go triple.
Absolutely, go triple.
However, if you're, some folks who are in the very kind of urbanized center of the cities where, it's conservation and various things like that, you can't really swap out your sash windows for something like that because, regulations don't allow you to do that, so you're a bit limited.
Yeah, exactly.
You might be able to do it at the back, but again, worthwhile checking.
Steal a pen, make a note.
And so on the sash side, even if you wanted a sash triple glaze, it's just because the glass itself, as you said, it's just incredibly heavy. So practically a non-consideration, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
But there's other things as well. It's how the windows reacts to the other elements of the fabric of the property, so to the walls, to how it's joined between the reveals and things like that.
This is always it's a query that we get actually all the time in relation to the external wall insulation, and that is thermal bridging and how to minimise cold bridging. Now, when you're replacing your window, in theory, you need to remove the window, insulate around the window frame. I've said this a million times, but you insulate around the window frame and then you put a smaller window back in. In reality, no one does it, but as you say, that is what you should do in if you were to try to sort of do the perfect job in terms of energy saving. So you've just got to do what is reasonable, I think, with a lot of this.
And had a gentleman, actually, he sent me an email yesterday and what he was thinking in relation to what you've just said. So he's not building a passive house, but he's using some principles from the passive house standards. Mm-hmm. So what he's going to do effectively, he is going to put external wall insulation, but he doesn't want his reveals to go that. So he's putting basically 200 millimeters of insulation, which is a hell of a lot. Yeah. But then he's building nice warm home. But he's then building a structural frame, to then support triple glazing. But then the insulation will house the frame itself, so it will not only insulate the reveals but the frame itself, because that's what the passive standards stipulate.
Nice. Yeah, which goes back to that point about
that, because it's a full-on conversion. That particular gentleman can do that, but not in every house. It's not.
And also, it's not something you're going to do on a house you're going to flip, is it? If you're going to buy a house and sell it 2 weeks later, it's not the kind of thing you're going to spend money doing. Anyway, right, next.
Oh gosh. Next one. Does a plough flush make my heating system more energy efficient, and by how much? Ooh.
Right. So a power flush. So basically, when you install a new heating system, typically you get iron residues in your radiators, where the radiators have sort of oxidised with the water that's travelling through them. So a power flush is basically flushing clean water and flushing the whole radiator system
under pressure.
Under pressure, and it brings. I don't know if you've when you do your radiators,
bleeding.
Yeah, when you bleed your radiators, have you ever seen some of the crappy gum?
I've seen a power flash gump.
Yeah, I mean it's actually incredible the amount of rubbish in there. Does it improve energy efficiency?
In principle, I mean it does, but I mean to measure it, that's a very difficult point there.
Because it's going to improve, number one, the flow rate. So the water is going to be able to travel around your heating system more effectively. So therefore, the hot water in your radiator can be emitted out. The heat in the hot water can be emitted out. So that's the purpose, and that's how your heating system works. So yes, it'll run more efficiently, but also it'll stop your boiler clogging up. Mm-hmm. And you can get little magnet cleans. So before the water comes back into the boiler, it goes through essentially a magnet, and that pulls a lot of this iron, ferrous oxide stuff out.
But also they add a chemical once it's flushed, so you don't have to flush it every 12 months. They add a chemical into the flow system, and that reduces the oxidization process. Yeah. And with the magnet clean, so if you get your boiler serviced every 12 months, that's something that the energy efficiency, the plumber should clean, amongst kind of the other things that they look for in a boiler safety and gas maintenance check.
Okay, moving on. Let's jump to this one. So this is one, and I can relate to this.
Mm-hmm.
So the question we get again is, do I need to get a smart meter? So the energy companies are relatively aggressive now in trying to push you onto a smart meter. So why is that? Why are they trying to get everyone to get smart meters?
Well, one, because we've spent a hell of a lot of money and we've gone this far.
Yeah.
So it's
but that's
a point of no return.
Reason, right?
So a point of no return. But secondly is we're trying to go from a very planned and unpredictable grid and a very, very centralized grid to a more demand responsive, real time, real pricing, real kind of energy flow grid. So if every household in the country and business had a smart meter, in theory, you would be able to price energy to the second, effectively.
Yeah.
You'll be able to respond to the forces of supply and demand, and then accordingly have the energy prices, in front of you there and then. And most importantly, the point about self-billing. So in theory, gone will be the days where there'll be a dispute between you and the company about the energy company or your provider of how much electricity and gas you should be paying, because it should be reported to them real time and you should be able to kind of monitor that.
So as you know, I had a smart meter fitted just before Christmas. So a few things I actually didn't know. Number one, the big energy suppliers now do offer smart meters for both electricity and gas, whereas when I looked a while ago, it was just on your electricity meter. And basically what happens is your electricity meter specifically has a little SIM card, essentially. So it is pinging a message to the energy company and saying, this is what we've used. Now, your gas meter, when you've got a smart gas meter, that talks to your electricity meter. So it gives a reading and then the electricity meter pings both readings across. They don't take any time to install. And when you do install them, you get the option to specify how often it is sending those readings to the energy company. Now, I imagine in time that will change, and it will be, as part of the course, that you are going to send a reading every minute or 2 minutes if we move to these time of use tariffs that you're sort of alluding to. Aside from that, it's genuinely very easy. It takes 2 hours.
And what did you specify in terms of frequency?
I think
once a month.
I think it was every half hour.
Wow. Okay.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't make any difference for me.
No.
The other thing that I think is really, really important now, and I can't remember the acronym for it, and you may be able to because you remember stupid stuff, but they're basically the second generation of smart meters now. And that makes an enormous difference, because if you'd had a first generation installed, then if I move energy suppliers, so say I go to British Gas to npower, they won't talk to one another potentially. So I've got a smart meter, but it becomes meaningless when I move to my new energy supplier. Now, this new models, what the hell is the acronym? Can't remember.
So I remember the SEG acronym, but that's nothing to do with...
It's something like
SMETS.
SMETS 2. There we go. Right. Okay. Sorry, Harry. Off camera. SMETS 2. So now when you get one installed, it will definitely talk to your future energy provider, etc., etc. So you've got no issues with switching again now.
And I like how your principle, when you're telling me about this whole process, how you've tried to do your history learning there, because, and I'll tell the viewers and readers how you've done your history learning there, is you went with smart energy meter from British Gas.
I did.
Because if you go back in time, British Gas was the monopoly of energy provision in the UK 25, 30 years ago, prior to privatisation.
Yeah.
So you think it'll be the trendsetter. So in theory, if you've got a British Gas smart meter, and this is not, but this is your view.
Yeah, it was my view. Yeah.
So if you swap, then it's more likely that nothing will go wrong with it.
So there were two reasons for that. Number one was I had a look, and British Gas actually was very cheap. It was up there with the cheapest. And number two, I wanted a big established company installing it, because if it went wrong, I could face dealing with them, but I can't face dealing with someone who has 2 people in their customer service office.
Big Six are established. Just to say.
So that's why I did it. But, actually, it's pretty good. It makes things easy. They have a nice online portal and stuff. I've always been scathing about British Gas, and I still am to an extent that with their add-ons, which is the monthly fee to, if your boiler breaks down, they'll come and fix it, because that should be built into the warranty anyway. So that's number one. But number two, the premium they charge for installing a boiler. If I get a British Gas approved engineer and a standard engineer to install my boiler, I'm going to be paying a pretty penny for the British Gas one.
But variance. Anyway, yeah. Okay.
The electricity that comes out is the same.
Here's one that can't really answer directly, but it leads on to a discussion. The question was, what is the cheapest energy tariff to be on?
Right, cheapest energy tariff. It depends, number one, where you are in the country. There's loads and loads of energy companies out there.
I've just switched.
And so you've got the established ones, and then you've got lots of little ones. And the little ones are buying energy off the big ones and then selling it. Now, lots of these little ones are now beginning to go under, but some of the ones that used to be quite small are now establishing themselves in the market, such as
OVO?
Yeah, OVO Energy, good example. There we go. So when we started this, they were very, very small. That's good. When we started this, they were very, very small, and now they're a really big company. So some of them are making this work.
First Utility.
There we go.
Showing off.
But what you need to do really is go to a switching site. So there are loads of these now. So just change switch energy supplier into Google, and a plethora of options will appear for you to pick.
And if you can't be bothered with that, say you're forgetful, which sometimes I get into. I can get into one of those auto switching companies like Save My. Oh, Harry knows.
Look after my bills.
Look after my bills.
That's it.
So that's the evolution of the switching company. So previously you had to put in what you were using, and they would you would choose who you switched every year. Now they just take care of it all. So that you will literally move from one to the next every year, and it keeps you on the cheapest tariff, in principle. Now, the thing about all these energy companies is they have particular deals with some of these switching companies. So some switching companies will prefer some energy suppliers. So just be mindful of it. But I would definitely recommend switching. The number of people who are with British Gas who have been forever and a day and don't switch is unbelievable. Because, just have a look. Maybe there's no saving there, but they might be able to offer a saving.
And if you're in the commercial sector, find yourself a good, trusted broker.
You don't even need to try and find yourself a good, trusted broker. The amount of phone calls I get about swapping...
But are they trusted?
I don't know. But I hate those phone calls a lot. So anyway, I now have a stock answer for them. But the next one, I don't know the answer to. Do you know the answer?
So maybe we can write a list of ones that we know. So the question is about suppliers that offer time of use tariffs.
Because time of use,
so we can have a look.
I feel time of use tariffs is going to become very big over the decade.
Because if you've got a smart meter,
yeah,
what's the point if it just?
But you want everyone to have smart meters, which is why the government are pushing for it before you move to it.
Because the early adopters are getting impatient. That's
exactly. This was when we had in just end of last year. So this question is all to do with solar panels. Now this is solar panels obviously produce electricity, and they had an issue with birds nesting under the solar panels because there's a gap between the roof and the solar panel, and it's kind of like the perfect height for birds to get underneath.
Yeah.
Now, I've actually, since doing a bit of research, number one, the energy company will offer, essentially they call it sort of pigeon protection when they're installing your solar panels. So that creates a barricade to stop any birds nesting under your solar panels. But the major issue with birds nesting there, and this is the issue that they were getting at, they were essentially crapping all over the solar panels.
Yes.
Now, in reality, that is much of a bigger issue than people think, because solar
to do with
panels,
the inverter, isn't it?
Yeah, it's all to do with inverters. So if you have one central inverter and I have 10 solar panels on my roof, the solar panels will all be operating at the sort of rate of the worst performing solar panel. So if I have one solar panel that happens to be a particular favourite for these pigeons, and they're booing all over it, and it's operating really inefficiently, my other 9 panels would all be operating at that same efficiency. So suddenly, it actually makes a real big difference to get these panels cleaned. When we're talking about the amount of electricity solar panels can produce if the sun is shining and they're in the right orientation and that sort of thing, it is most definitely worth getting solar panels cleaned and getting the preventative measures in place to stop them nesting there in the first place.
Can I just say to the viewers that no pigeons were harmed in you finding out this research and information, James?
Couple. Right, so that's that one. This one... So this
we just had an election. Well, we talked about election. Didn't we? Yeah.
So this was now we've got a new prime minister, and all things are due to change, and they've got a massive majority, and they're trying to change Whitehall. Is DECC going to be reintroduced? Now in 2011, DECC was when we started all this.
Department for Energy and Climate Change.
Department for Energy. They had their own specialist department, and they really took climate change it was very important, and they took it very seriously. And this is when the Green Deal was launching, and the eco sort of funding mechanism was launching. And was it 2014?
That's when Cameron came back in 15.
Is that when DECC got canned?
Yeah.
And they basically sort of grouped it all up into
one department.
Into
BASE.
Into BASE. Which stands
for business, energy, infrastructure.
No?
Industrial strategy.
Strategy.
That's where we got Harry here. But who knows? We'll have to find out on the 1st of February anyway. After.
Do you think Big Ben's going to ring on the 31st of January?
Depends if the crowdfunding.
Is it £500,000? If they pay me $100,000, I will ring it all year long.
Well, Bill Cash said he'll physically go up there and ring it himself.
I'll ring it.
So
$100,000. I'd save the government $400,000. Anyway,
that's what the Brexiteers have been saying. But anyway,
so we're kind of running out of time.
Australian bushfires. Thoughts?
Horrendous, absolutely horrendous. Seeing some of the pictures and stuff, some of the this sounds really bad, but it's more like the impact on the animals and things that you see. It's just heartbreaking.
Yes.
And I think it is dreadful that humans lost their lives, but it's a fraction of the number of animals that are losing their homes and that sort of thing. I was watching something on Good Morning Britain, which judge me, I know, yes, occasionally I watch it, and they had their MP, an Australian MP came on, and he was basically just denying climate change was anything to do with it. And it was quite an interesting fight between the meteorologist lady on Good Morning Britain and this chap, and it's too coincidental. It
feels like the truth is in the middle.
Well, it's too coincidental that all of this stuff is now occurring more and more and more and more as we are, burning more and more and more fossil fuels. Do you know what I mean? I feel that they have to be related somehow.
So we're accelerating it slightly, but maybe the exaggeration is not as extreme as what.
But potentially, but if we're only making it worse slightly, and the kind of things we're seeing are horrendous, thank God we're not doing it more. But then I read reports about the sea and the oceans basically becoming
that is real, yeah.
Well, becoming carbon stores, so carbon dioxide stores. So they're becoming more and more acidic because they can absorb this excess carbon dioxide that we're firing out.
Or garbage holding places. I mean, they've got that place up in the North Pacific, isn't it? It's called the Trans-Pacific.
Oh, with all the plastic and stuff. Yeah. I just kind of feel that.
I mean, that is absolutely horrendous.
We could take a little bit more care of everything.
Of the planet, yeah.
Because we're not here for that long, so we may as well try and be nice to it. Which, that's my feelings.
Yeah.
But the guys that are purposely setting fire to the Australian bush essentially should be put in prison for a very, very long time and keys thrown away.
The issue is that
Being
they've said
polite.
that the profile is a lot of folks are of school-going age, so there's only certain things you can do to people that are not adults.
Throw them in the sea. No, no, I won't comment because I'll get in trouble. Right,
So we're quick fire round, facts and figures.
We're just going to go now. So we've got energy saving news, but it's with a twist. So it is just facts and figures on energy saving news as we enter the new decade.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know data centers account currently for 2% of all energy use in the world? Right, so data centers. So this is basically people, saving pictures on Facebook and saving it on Google and doing all this stuff
and watching us,
data, watching us, etc., etc. 2%. Now, data, the size of data is kind of it's quadrupling every couple of years or something. So I mean, so they reckon by 2030, so the end of this decade, it'll be 8% of all electricity used in the world is going to go on running data centers. Sure. No, we'll talk about that in more detail.
That's it's a good topic to open. Going back onto what we're saying about climate change stuff, it's worth noting and, giving this country a pat on the back because we rarely do it. We're very, good to criticize stuff, but it's worth just saying, and there's a few facts here. So coal, we have drastically reduced the amount of coal use. So coal, when you burn coal, it produces some very nasty byproducts, nitrogen oxides and sulfur dioxides, things that are responsible
and
carbon dioxide, things that are responsible for acid rain, CO2 emissions, etc. So as a nation, so since 2006, we were effectively using up to 50% of coal for our electricity generation production.
Mm-hmm.
As of last year, even in our peak quarter, which I call this peak quarter because it's middle of winter, so January, February, March, we're down to less than 3%. So from 50% to 3%, I would say in the period of 13 odd years is pretty darn good.
Yeah, it's good. And you can see that, with wind, for example, has gone up since beginning 2010. We're looking at 2.5%. And we're now looking at 2020 between 15 and 20%, which again is an enormous rise. The best thing about this is as we build more and more, the costs are coming down and down. So yes, we still have a problem that it's an intermittent energy source, so you need to have some sort of energy storage, which we haven't yet nailed. But the fact is, when a wind turbine is spinning, it is producing clean, free electricity.
But things to worry on the horizon, I suppose, is on the baseload power. We're very reliant now on gas and imports.
Yeah.
Not majority, but a lot of that stuff is on LNG. The North Sea, we are desperate. We're on low supplies of natural gas, so most of that stuff is imported.
Yeah.
And nuclear power, it is a low carbon electricity generating source, but at the minute with the technology that we've got and what we committed ourselves in, i.e. Hinkley Point C, very expensive, but our legacy power stations are quickly being turned off. So
2030 we'll have one left of the legacy power stations, which means, and currently they're producing about 20% of our electricity, and they've been doing that for the last 20, 30 years, no issues, and we're going to lose it, and we've got no succession planning. So we're going to have to make up that shortfall from somewhere else. And that is the biggest worry going to this new decade in terms of energy saving.
Very
That's
good.
it. So we're going to finish up there because we're rambling on now. As I said, there's been a bit of a delay, us coming back after Christmas. But we're back now and we're going to try and do these once a week.
Yes, and a lot of good things to look forward to next week. So next week we're into Energy Saving Week. So a lot of initiatives from the greenage.co.uk in terms of blogs. We'll try and do another video for that week. It's just kind of raising people's awareness for things like, what are kind of cheap and easy things they can do to be more energy efficient. Talking a bit more about switching again. So basically the same themes, to kind of hammer those things home of why it's important to save energy and, just obviously, do our little bit for the planet.
Perfect. Very good. Well, listen, Nick, thanks very much. And we will see you next week.
See you later.